time limit?
However long you would like.
No, no. We get a little technical, so we'll try to work it so it's easy to understand. Let me. Everybody can see my screen, right? Hello?
Yes, yes, I
Yes.
can see it.
Okay. My talk tonight is on architectural haiku as how I view my images that I create, and I'm going to give a little presentation on how I actually make my images. I'll start off with pretty much a little bit about me. As normal for most of us, I guess, I made family and event photographs as a young teenager, and in the late 60s, I bought my first 35mm camera. And then by the 70s, I was sort of very interested in it and just started with film cameras and view cameras. And in 2014, after I retired, I joined the Cheltenham Camera Club located up here in Cheltenham. And I started entering a lot of competitions. And my favorite thing to do is architecture, especially while I'm walking in New York City, and I go up there quite frequently. Let me close one of these icons here. Okay. So the tools that I use in order to make my images are, and how I begin, I use live view with a full frame digital camera. I'm using raw images and manual focus with focus peaking so I can fine tune the focus that I want. In the house here, I'm an iMac with a pen and tablet, Adobe Lightroom Classic and Photoshop. And I do use, on occasion, DxO Pure Raw 3, and I just love Silver Effects. It's been one of my favorites for years. Some of the other tools I use while I'm trying to create this is a dynamic symmetry root 1.5 diagram, and we'll just talk very briefly about that a little later. I guess average processing time for me is 1 to 2 hours, depending on the image. And my training has really been with the pen tool, gradients, and Photoshop, as I'll mention later on with Sharon Tenenbaum, who's out in Vancouver, Canada, and she has some really good training statements, and I've spent some time with her there. And I also use some of the elements of Lean Six Sigma, which is basically how I get my process together so I can repeat it and do it over and over again and try to improve it each time I do that. Right now, a little shameful self-promotion. I'm a huge competition person. I must enter 20 or 30 a year and spend a lot of money, but it's just what I like to do. My most recent ones were the Monochrome Awards, the Neutral Density Awards, and just recently the Tokyo International Photo Award. So additionally, I also give another presentation on competition because since 2014, I've been keeping an extensive spreadsheet that tells me almost everything I do about entering a competition and all the factors that get involved in that. So that's something you may like to hear from me at a later date. All right, so let's get started here. I'm going to be switching between my presentation, the actual Photoshop, to show you how I'm doing these particular images. So normally, for my process preparation, I always consider that failing is a part of the learning process. So you fail and you fail, and that does happen. You learn from that and get back up and try to do it again. So one of my processes, I do use Lightroom Classic, and the things I do in Lightroom Classic, you can do in Camera Raw, so you don't necessarily have to, in Photoshop, You don't necessarily have to use Lightroom Classic. Basically, opening in Lightroom to view and select the images. I might decide to do DX Raw 3, Pure Raw 3, to sort of enhance an image, lens corrections, and things like that to make it maybe a little sharper and so forth. I hit the auto develop button, adjust the highlights and shadows, etc., and then tweak it to where I think it's really a good image that I can use. I'll straighten it and I'll think of some potential cropping. I am a view camera person at the core, so I view through my camera that way. I view my images that way in that 8x10 format. So when I print, all my images are printed at 17x22. So anything I exhibit goes up that particular size. Nothing wrong with any other size, but I just follow that procedure because I really like it a lot. And anytime anybody has a question, just feel free to speak up and we'll go from there. And as I said a little bit before, I do use a overlay loop, which is the dynamic symmetry root 5. And I'm just starting to see how that may affect and improve my images in composition or how I compose them. And just to give you an idea of what that's like is in Photoshop on the left or Lightroom on the right, I can overlay a dynamic symmetry diagram and just see how the images has come along as far as its composition, how the lines flow, how the light flows, and those kind of things. Now, this is relatively new to me, so I'm still experimenting and looking to see how this may help me improve composition and what I do. Then I'll take that image into Photoshop and I'll copy the image. I'll select and add a layer. I'll edit and fill that layer with black. I'll select the adjustments and gradient fill basics to do a background for my lighting, as I'll show you as soon as we finish this particular slide. And I'll select linear, radial, or diamond formats in order to display in the back of my architectural image. And also adjust the angle or reverse it or align it with the layer off. So let me now go over to my Photoshop. And can it, oops. Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Okay, we're good. And so this is just one of my particular images that I like, that I'm going to show you how I've actually processed this particular image. As I said in my PowerPoint, I bring the image in. We'll take a look at my layers. Down at the very bottom is the original layer. I'm going to, the next layer up, which is in purple, I'm going to show you how I actually do a path in order to make some selections. And sometimes I'll add that dynamic grid just to see what direction I might want to go with using light and gradients and so forth. So there you go. So usually I make a copy of my image, which you'll see up here. It says non-essential removal layer up at the top. And what I do is that I add a layer filled in black. And what I want to do then is to, on that layer, add a gradient. And I select what kind of gradient I want for the background of my particular images. So I use the gradient fill diagram, and I'll go in and I'll select the basics, foreground to background, which gives me solid colors. I'll say okay. And I'll select the direction, although the radial, as you see is selected here, doesn't give you a direction, but the scale will increase it or decrease it to some degree. and you can decide how bright or how dark you want it or how specific you want it. And I uncheck the align with layer so that I can come over. You'll see I have the move tube so that I can always come back and move it to a specific place that I really want it there in order to show the building or highlight in a certain way. So right now we'll just say okay with that. Once that is done, I then need to go up and remove the skyline from the original image. Okay, that's the blue skyline here. So what I do with that, I make a selection with the pen tool. Like I say, some of this can be a little bit repetitive, but I really enjoy this with architecture because there are a lot of straight lines, some slight curves, but it's one of the tools that I talked about that I use that really helps me carve out specific areas in a particular image. You'll notice I have several, but I'll select that. And this is the area that I've selected that I want to remove out of the image because I want to put that black backdrop in there with the highlighted area. So what I'll do is just enlarge this a little bit. Bring it down. And you can see where I've drawn these lines, and I'll show you how I do that just with one particular time, but I'll select it in particular. And you see there's little white dots here, and what I can do is decide how I want to move that line anywhere and make a particular selection that I'm going to highlight. It'll be selected. You'll have the running ants, and then I can perform any action on it that I want to change it in some way or another. So I'm going to bring this back to full 0. And what I'll do now is go back to my layers. And what I've done is I've selected that particular area. My paths here. And that's the one I'm showing there. I'll come down and select it and make it a selection. You'll see the marching ants all around it. And I'll go back to my layers. And as I select this particular image, I hit Control X or Command X. I'm on a Mac here. And that will eliminate or take out that particular section. Oops. And it comes down to, let me pull up the, come on, Philip. What did I do here? Sorry, I'll have it in a second here. Oh, I had that selected up top. So what you see here is that I've taken out the sky, and now the building sits on top of the black backdrop gradient that I have that I've selected, in this particular case, a moon. But I can go back and select a diamond instead. And as you see, it's, whoops. Let me go back down on. So now I can move that diamond anywhere around that I want. Okay. I can't do it with the picture on top. But you'll see that it just gives a different backlight, and I have several choices to make in order to, I can do an angle. That's a little bit too sharp, but I can scale it up. and eventually make it brighter or darker. Not going as smooth as I thought it would. Okay, hopefully you see how I can play around with it. I can always go back to that and move that around and change it between radial, circular, or diamond, or whatever I'd like to do there. Uh, Once I pretty much have this in place, that I have a background that I like and uh, the building placed where I want, I'll generally use a hue and saturation level, and that will bring me down and just take it to a basic black and white. We're going to operate on it and do several other things with it. And what we're going to do is, as I said, I take and create different paths and curves that I can make selections with. Now, this is called left triangle 3. When you make a path, any of these paths here, um, in order to maintain them, you must save them. And I rename them so that uh, I can reuse them, and I reuse them in creating curves, and I also use the same paths in creating gradients. So the curves for each individual path that I've used uh, will give me good contrast or highlight different areas and different lines in here so that I can have some good detail in there. And as I get up into the gradients will add a, a shade of light to give it a three-dimensional feel. So we'll go back down here and take a look at these curves that I did. Okay, this is the, no, this is the paths I have to get. Center right triangle. Okay, there it is there. Okay, right triangle. As you see, this can become, I don't know, complicated. I mean, I've done it so often, it's easy for me, but trying to show it and give it some flow may be a little bit difficult to understand here, or uh, whatever. So what I do, I've made a selection, and now that it's selected, I can go to my layers, and this is the particular one. And now I can adjust the curves in that particular area. Uh, what did I do? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Um, Let me back up. I've adjusted these curves here already. Um, what I have to do is take a pad. This is not panning out the way I wanted it to. Let me settle down a little bit. In order to get to do the paths and the curves, I'll start it from scratch where I'll take the pen tool. And just to show you how this does work, I've created that path. It's a work path. I double click on it and I save it. I say okay. I adjust it according to where I want it to go. And then I select it. Then I come back to my layers. I'll come down that image and I'll add a gradient layer to that. Once I do the gradient layer, I'm coming in to use a linear one that's a neutral density, and I get to decide and see how dark I want to make it, as you'll see it changing down there. What direction I want it to flow from. As you see, as I scale it down, the dark is moving up in one direction. Now it's close to a straight line, but I can choose the direction from that, the way the light goes from light to dark or dark to light by changing the angle. So as I move it around, it's there. I can gradually move it over and slide. And for each one of these paths, that's how I decide where everything goes and how it particularly flows. And this is a gradient fill that is not solid. It just goes from light to dark over whatever area you've selected to process it over. Yes, so. Now that's very confusing, let me see if I can go back and show you a little more of how this actually works. Boy. Okay. So this is the overhang section here. And in my layers here, I chose just to make a very light change in this. Now, if I can't change this here because this is not the running ants. And I think I'm confusing you more than anything.
I actually use the lassos when I do what you're doing.
I'm sorry, you used the what?
Oh, I use the lassos. It's like you're teaching me a new way to do this, because I use the lassos and I use the to isolate areas to do what you're doing. But this is interesting with the paths. It's something I'd not have thought of before and didn't. And I'm learning how to do it now. So
thank you very much. It hopefully
it's a new technique.
I'm sorry.
It's a new technique that I'm going to be looking at when this is over.
Okay, I understand. So I go through my whole image and make the selection. And yes, I then add once I've added the selection here, I do come back and I add in a gradient layer. And that allows me to make adjustments to that. Now I've already got one here, so this is just really a copy of that. And I'll see if I can change it while it's right on there. And this picture's already done, and I do have it finalized. And I thought I could go through and just show you how I did that there. Maybe it would be better to show you in real time. So uh, as you see, I can take any one of these now and go back and change that and decide that I like this flow here of light and dark over on this particular side. So I've done that with all of these paths. And as you see, I've gone through and made, I guess there's 9 or 10 of them there. In order to selectively select any particular one and say, look at what's next to it and see if there's something that can be made to appear three-dimensional, so that if one section is showing light, the section next to it, for instance, this one, and let's see, left triangle 2, those two that are there, if I go between those two and make one lighter and one darker with sort of a shading that's gradual, it gives it a really more three-dimensional look, and it gives some more depth to the image. So uh, uh, that's part of my process, my thought process for making all of these different selections and uh, just trying to create that variation like they do in the newer type cartoons that they have nowadays. I mean, I think most of you are old enough to remember the old original Mickey Mouse. It looked really just one-dimensional. Then it got two-dimensional. Now you look at them, they look like they're almost human with all the shading and everything. And that's really the effect that I'm trying, or the effect I'm going to. It's not as good as that, but that's where I'm headed there. So once I have all of these paths, uh, I do put them, I name them all, and I name them all similarly if I'm doing different grading. So this folder has all the curves, and this folder has all the gradients that I use for each individual one. So I did the gradient just before and showed you that particular one. I do go back and color code them so that I have some idea as to what's in which particular folder. I name my folders and so forth. So as we know, it was turned into black and white. Uh, as you've seen, I do have the gradients and the paths and the curves in there. And
Hey, Dutch,
yes,
I have a question for you.
yes.
I noticed you used the hue saturation adjustment layer to convert to black and white. Any reason that you used that instead of a black and white conversion layer?
Well, I did that for this particular uh, image because ultimately I use Lightroom as my primary processing uh, platform. And yes, you can't do certain things in uh, Lightroom that you can do in Photoshop, like cutting these things out and putting in the backgrounds. So from Lightroom, I usually go into Silver Effects, and that's where I get my black and white uh, final image from. I do that here so I have a sense of what a black and white might potentially be.
Okay.
This is more of a indicator to me, so I can see the black and white effects that I might want to do or enhance or those kind of things. So I'm not really changing it to black and white here for making it black and white. Uh, there are times when I will bring up, it's more simple. I'll process an image in Lightroom and then bring it, be black and white, and then I'll bring it into Photoshop and do what I've done here. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I got it.
So
Thank you.
As we'll turn all of these on here. These are all the curve adjustments that I did to enhance the differences between the lights and the darks and really make them stand out a little bit more. So you can see that one on the side, how the lines were a little bit faded. I needed to have them a little bit stronger, a little more texture in those lines over there. And then for each one of those, I went back and then added a gradient fill. And for all of those, as you'll see, the different sections come up.
So it's more dramatic when you darken it.
It's more dramatic when you darken it, and there's a different, now this is a radial fill on this side. And these are mostly all linear, where this particular narrow path that I created here, it took quite a while to get that lined up so that I'll enlarge it a little bit. Oops, little delay there. Lined up so that the dark area was along the bottom of the red line here. And when I did this section, I made this one a little bit lighter. So there's a difference in contrast between dark and light here. Not so much here, but this was more radial gradient that I added on this particular side. So, and that pretty much happens throughout all of the images that I do here. It's a little lighter here, darker on this side, so that for me, it gives more of a sense of three-dimensionality. Oops, Control-0. So, and then as I go up, oops, let me take that path out. I combined all of the layers, and that gave me a black and white, and then I sent it into Silver Effects Pro. And my Silver Effects Pro is, I have certain presets that I have in there that I will tweak slightly, but my style is to have a sepia toning to all of my images. So any image you see of mine is typically this toned image in black and white, nice contrast and so forth. So finally, what I decided to do, I was looking at the bottom side here with the lights, and let's see, not the bottom side there. As you'll see, this section in here, I just wanted that a little bit darker and to make it, put a second gradient in it for the whole image to make it lighter up here and darker down on the bottom. So with that all to do, that is ideally my process. I will come back after this and I will add on or revisit my dynamic symmetry grid. And ideally, I'll take a look to see where I might want to make the final crop. It'll go back into Lightroom because Lightroom is my primary tool for processing an image. And I'll decide to which way to, I'll decide there which way to crop it. But this gives me some sense of what it may look like, what lines have good flow to them, and so forth. So, does anybody have any other questions at this point? Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Oh,
You had
yes.
mentioned doing with sepia tone and What are your thoughts on cyanotypes and the other different black and white colors? I just I've seen so many different versions of Metropolis where some of the edits they tried different things.
Well, for me, mine has been trying to move to a singularity. This is my particular style. I have used those in the black and white in the dark room when I used to do dark room work. You know, those many years ago. I don't do any of that now. And I experimented with a lot of those, but sepia just spoke to me, and I just had a good warm feeling about it. It's a warm color, so in Silver Effects Pro, down at the very bottom, in order to enhance an image or finish an image, there is sepia number 19, which is the lightest of the 3 sepias. So that's typically the one I use, and it's one of my presets that I just can go in there and just put a sepia 19 tone on it, and that may finalize the image. But it's really my style and how I have felt about it all these years doing darkroom work and those kind of things. So that's what I like to do. That's why it's sepia.
Can you guys hear me okay? I have a quick question.
Sure.
First of all, I want to say thank you for taking us through the steps of how you process this image. Most people just like to show the end result, and it's like, ooh, it's magical. But you show us what you start with, and you show everything that goes on behind the scenes. That's really good. I have done similar things with my pictures in the past, but unlike this picture, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your work, but I'm assuming that this picture is typical of what you like to shoot, rigid architecture, which is one of my favorite subjects too. However, I also, and I'm sure a lot of people here also like to shoot landscapes, or basically things that don't always have cut and dry edges. Your use of the pen tool works great here. When I've done things, I've had to rely on layer via copying with the magic wand tool, and I'm thinking back in time, like maybe 10 or 15 years, so maybe even before I started shooting raw, basically with messier edges is what I'm getting at. Do you have any advice for similar treatment of images where the edges are not that cut and dry?
Unfortunately, I don't, but for me, it's how well you can make a selection.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
If you can
And
use
that's,
the
yeah,
lasso
you can
tool,
spend hours making a single selection. I have.
you can spend time with that. I mean,
Okay.
since my love is architecture, it just generally falls into straight lines and circles and squares and rectangles.
And
So
since
yes, that is a lot easier. But there
I mean, I'm sorry.
are times when I do have to make a curve out of it, and the pen tool does make nice curves. Depending on how much time you want to spend, you can bend and select
You can select your
and a
heart's
few
content.
things with, but for those fine edges, and I'm using the extreme like hair or
Yes, hair, trees,
those
nature.
kind of things.
Maybe architecture, but nature too. This is
Yeah. I mean, I think the technique would probably work for some of those other styles.
you got to be really careful though. And
Yes.
I'm assuming that these paths, I don't pay for a subscription, so I have an older version of Photoshop that stays the same. But I've worked with Illustrator enough to know that they're merging some of their features, including paths, curves, and things like that.
Yes.
May I assume that when you're dealing with a master file, I see it's a PSD, that it saves all these paths and their edits non-destructively. I guess that goes without saying.
Oh, yes.
You can always go back and edit it.
Right. As you'll see in the bottom right here, it says a work path.
Okay.
If you create a path,
It's basically Illustrator tools, and that's great. I love how the best of all worlds are available to us now.
I mean, yes, all these paths are saved with the image
PSD.
file. So you can always come back and these are regular paths, but there are vector type paths that are more flexible.
Mhm.
I don't think you can save those, but if you change your, if you want to go back and change something, if you move the path, your your
Well,
your
these paths
adjustment doesn't move with it.
they're all defined. These paths that you're working with are all defined by vectors, right? They're not rastered, even if you save them as PSD.
Now, let me let me understand. When I save a path, it's saved as a path. There is
Okay.
something also called a vector that I'm not familiar with that much, but it's another way of creating a selection, hiding it with the ants, and you can, take some action on it.
I think,
Okay.
Dutch, it's a difference between a
So we-
vector mask and an ordinary mask. So with a vector mask,
So
it's tied to the path, and then when the path is changed, the vector mask automatically does update, which is different than with a mask creating from the
so
marching ant.
these paths are still defined more or less by their pixel coordinates, so to speak. I'm just trying to get a sense of if I save a picture and then go back and see it's not quite right and I want to fix it, like say like one of the edges wasn't quite right, how easy would it be? Would it be simple enough for you without having to go
It-
back and repeat, tens of minutes of work to tweak the angle of one path in
It is
particular?
it is doable, but it is time consuming.
Okay.
Uh, so yes, I'm usually very careful when I make a selection to look at it very closely to make sure it goes exactly where I want it to go. Uh, because it can become rather touchy if it's off a little bit,
It's
you go
you're
and do
sort of going by single, like almost like a single, like a very, it's like cutting a picture out with a razor blade, and with what you're shooting, it works. But quite often, depending on your perspective, your depth of field, whatever, the edge might not always be sharp. And I remember whenever I've made an edge, I've almost always had to feather my selection a little bit just so it didn't look fake or cut out. I'm not saying yours look fake at all. It looks amazing, and I appreciate everything you're showing me. But I'm just trying to apply what you're teaching me to the kind of things I do.
no, but you do have a good point. There are ways of making this um, uh,
Feather, can you
Here.
soften it?
have
a little
sort of a
bit?
softer edge. Because yes, it can be too hard. I've had some responses from some of the images I've done that some people said they thought it was a little bit too sharp and too hard, and it looked more cut out than more natural fitting into the
And
image. So making a selection, you can, and it's up here along the path area as to,
and
and I forget where it is right offhand, that you can actually soften that a little bit so it's not as,
okay, and saves it as part. I got you. Okay.
yes, so that does work that way too.
And if you don't mind, I have one other short but very
Sure.
geeky question. This file in particular, I'm 12, I'm basically frozen 12 years in the past because I don't update my hardware or software. Um, what image resolution, I do shoot RAW, but what image resolution, basically what is this file size of the PSD that you're working with for this one in particular?
This one with
As-
layers is 920 meg.
Okay, so it's pretty bulky, but
Yes.
it's worth it. I'll never say it's not worth it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let me just stop sharing this.
Dutch has stopped screen sharing.
Okay.
And I can mute myself for whoever wants to go next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dutch has started screen sharing.
So this was the next slide with, somehow it's selecting the pen tool, creating a path and removing an item that's not wanted. That would have been the sky. You need to save your paths, and then you can select and remove using the Command X, and that will remove that particular sky or any other unwanted item. And then you you go into your options and make adjustments with hue and saturations, and you can change it to black and white. Create and save path selections for curves and gradient adjustments, um, and you can go back and readjust those to your heart's content ad infinitum until you get the light flowing like you want it, the dark to light areas, and all those kind of things.
And I heard you
Sorry.
mention that you use the Silverlight plugin for Photoshop, and I use that too. So if Art Braitman's there, thank you, Art. I appreciate that. You got that from me.
Oh, yeah.
But it's somewhat of a, it's like a special treat as far as I'm concerned. And most people in Photoshop don't have access to this, even if you subscribe to the full Creative Cloud. It's a little something extra
Yeah.
that allows you to do wondrous things in black and white, simulated black and white. And I love the results. I wouldn't call these failures happy accidents, if you want to quote Bob Ross. And I'm not sure what I was getting at. So
I can accept that. I mean, I thought the bright line through the back, really in the end, when I decided that was the final one, that it really just wasn't real enough. The side of this building over here, I thought was just, didn't have enough contrast to it. It really looked sort of flat and so forth. This was a more
I mean,
difficult one to try to make selections with, because you see all the individual windows.
yes, yeah.
Quite a few, but
And
there's a lot to select there.
if you don't mind me saying so, I think the two on the right are, I think they're fully they can support themselves as finished pieces. The ones on the left, I wouldn't even call them failures. I mean, they might need some more work as far as the backgrounds, like you said. The gradients are very obvious, but you're onto something. I'm just thinking.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
And these are some of the more recent ones I've done that really make me happy. And this one up in the upper right was one that they said the corners or the edges were really too sharp. It sort of looked like it was sitting outside of the picture, and I agree with that. I may go back and do that. This is just another building that's right in my immediate area here in Elkins Park area, and I just love the flow of the building and the shape and the design and everything. You're probably familiar with the pagoda up in Reading. Oops. And down at the Navy Yard, the Intrepid building. I was up in Allentown, and that's the St. George Orthodox Church. I just happened to buy and saw and just fell in love with the architectural style of this, with these sort of rounded roof styles. And this was a building down in Washington, D.C. And I will admit that this particular building, they look like glass panels there, but they are not. They're how I added a gradient to that side of the building and decided to put a dark line in there to make it look like glass, because it looked like glass when it was there. So those dark lines weren't there. So sometimes you can be inspired and make something really, really new. Just some of the references that I will pass on to make it part of this presentation. You know, the DxO Pure Raw takes care of some, I use it to take care of some distortion, lens and chromatic aberrations, and noise reduction. One of the instructors I admire a lot is Sharon Tenenbaum. She gives a free weekly instruction, and she has tools and workshops. If you're interested in dynamic symmetry, and that's not an easy thing, dynamic symmetry. So it's just something I'm experimenting with and seeing how it may help me in how I compose an image, but you may see something there that may inspire you to look further into that. One of my favorite artists is Cole Thompson. I love the way he makes his black and white images that are really have so much vibrant dimension to them that they just speak to me really nice. And I always shout out to a friend of mine who does fine art printing and framing is Peter Hewitt up in Doylestown, PA. I'd also want to mention that I'm a member of about 9 different clubs and associations, and the Phillips Mill Photography is one, and the call for art is just getting ready or just went out. And that call for art opens for anybody who's interested in competition, opens February 1st and runs through February 29th. So if you just went up on the Phillips Mill photo website, you would be able to see this and decide whether you want to enter. And I encourage everybody to think about that. And if you like competitions, jump in and enter your photos. And that really was the end. So thank you so much. And if there are any other questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those, but we'll see.
I have one question.
Yes.
If not using a view camera or a tilt and shift lens, you get a lot of converging lines. The 3-point perspective can be good. If you look at a lot of historic architectural photos, they use the skew function of perspective to straighten it out, so you're looking at orthogonally, but you can get other strange artifacts. Do you have any thoughts on having the buildings orthogonally straight up, like an old-fashioned architecture picture?
That is my original style, where everything I did with the view camera and what I initially have tried with the 35 millimeter and the current digital cameras I have. But as I walk the streets of New York City and look up, for me, it's hard to do that. I'm also, and I do more than architectural work, you can see on my website, but it's hard to look up and not see something in a building in an abstract manner, which I view the image that I showed there a little more towards the abstract than actually seeing the building. I'm more looking at the lines and how the directions they go in, the squares, how they relate to maybe circles and that particular image. But those kind of things are what inspire me. Yes, I love a squared off, actually perfect building as if you were standing looking at it and everything is in line and straight to the edge and parallel and so forth. So, and some of my, what I would consider abstract, like I have a circular windows up in, I took up in New York City. It's an old naval hotel or something like that over near the west side. And I had to look up to photograph that, but I eventually made it into as if you were looking at it straight on. So I can go both ways with that. But yes, with the view camera, I really do like the actual building squared and just like, using all those different things to make it straight.
Hey, Dutch, on that point, what kind of lenses do you find that you're using mostly in this kind of work?
Limited. I used to use a whole lot of different lenses, and for right now, I'm using a 24 to 200 zoom lens. Usually when I go out to photograph, I just use one lens. I know John Stritcher, one of my friends and colleagues here, is on, and he and I both purchased a 15 millimeter lens. I'll use that for, which really has some good perspective. It's not like a bullseye. I use that for maybe some night astrophotography, but I've photographed some buildings with it that have really come out quite well. So those are really just the two that I use. I mean, I'm sort of a minimalist in that sense. For me, less is better. I'd like to get to know my lens intimately and the camera intimately rather than switching between a whole lot of them. And that's just me. I mean, doesn't reflect on how anybody else decides to use, more lenses and a specific lens for a specific purpose. So,
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your presentation tonight. I picked up a couple of things I'd like to try, and glad you shared with us.
well, thank you very much. It's rather technical, and I'm trying to think of a better way. I've presented it once before, but I'm trying to think of a better way to show it so it's not so, because there are different experiences that people have, and I'd like to be able to share that and have people pretty much understand it. So I'm still working on it. Hopefully the next time I'll do better than this time.
No, thank you, thank you. It's really hard for people to understand
Dutch has stopped
what's
screen sharing.
involved. It's hard for people to understand what's involved in a photograph. You see something, you like it, but you really don't have an understanding of what's involved. And I think your presentation has given us more depth into understanding what's involved. It's not just click, 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 oh, beautiful picture. No, it's not like that anymore. Beautiful pictures, amazing photography, takes a lot of work. And thank you very much, because I know that doing a presentation like this is not the easiest thing in the world. And I just, when people just share what they know with us. I know for John, for some of our younger members, it's just inspiring for them to just get involved and try and try and try. And so thank you. So I just thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Can I ask you one more basic question?
Sure.
I mean, I don't like when people ask me this because I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter. What camera do you use? What do you prefer to shoot with, and why?
I use a Nikon Z currently.
Okay.
Uh,
I haven't heard of this.
the only
I'm a
reason
Nikon guy.
my father had Nikons and I inherited
Same. That's why I'm a Nikon guy.
up with that. But
I inherited it.
I just find it as a tool. I don't find one camera necessarily outperforming another. For me, it's a tool, and you just have to get to know your tool.
And you got to be comfortable with the tool you're using.
Yes, absolutely.
So-
So I just happen to fall into Nikon, and that's really what I use.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. Mhm.
Okay, hopefully everyone will stay safe and nice and warm, and look forward to getting together with us for the third Tuesday in February. And it's after Valentine's Day, so we are not going to disturb Valentine's Day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dutch.
Yeah.
Good to see
Thanks,
you.
Dutch. It was great.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye, John. Thank you.
Stay healthy. Good night.
Good night.